Welcome to another video. Today we're going to be plein air painting down in Wellington. Hopefully. The weather's not looking too crash hot though. But I'm heading down now. I cannot wait. I'm meeting up with my brother from another mother, Mr. Samuel Earp. We're also catching up with Clark Roworth and Ben Dellabarca, a couple of Wellington painters who are insanely talented. It should be fun if we can just find a spot of dry weather. Hopefully we can get some good paintings out. We'll be dodging the rain showers by the looks of things. It's Wellington, very unpredictable, always wet. I think I found my spot. Epic foreground, lots of white water, waves crashing, some really cool rocks and structure. I can't wait to get into this. I just gotta make it out here without breaking my leg.
Sam, I've kind of painted this entire coastline
Yeah.
multiple times, so I'm very much this is paint anywhere. We
Brilliant.
actually did an awesome John Crump workshop here. That was sick.
You painted with John Crump
Yeah,
here?
man, it was great.
Dude.
We set up down here, we did sketches, me and Amit did his workshop.
This is the, and Samuel Earp, ladies and gentlemen, Samuel Earp. Oh, it's looking good. I have a portable easel box that I attach to the top of a tripod. This is called a pochade box. They're so handy for plein air painting. I'll put a link to the boxes that I use in the description down below. I squeeze out all of the oil colors that I'm going to need here in the lid of the pochade box. And here's a list of the colors that I'm using for this little demonstration. I find that this is a pretty good range and helps me mix colors accurately out in the field. And for my medium, I'm going to use some Galkid gel. This will help the paint flow a little better and also speed up that drying time. And there's my kit. I'm good to go, ready to make a painting. Now, painting plein air is all about strategy, and it's about having some sort of plan of attack to try and capture as much as you can within a limited time frame. I always start off by sketching in my composition. This is where I make some snap judgments about things that I really want to include and highlight in this composition. And I'm also editing constantly as I'm painting. So I'm not going to paint everything that I'm seeing here in front of me. I'm going to focus on the really important stuff and stuff that I want to kind of play with and communicate with that paint. Once I've sketched this up, ordinarily I start with the shadows first. But here, I kind of forgot to do that. Here I was in studio mode, and for a lot of my big studio paintings, I start with whatever's distant first and work my way forward. But we had a limited window of light. Wellington was up to its usual tricks, and it was a typical overcast day. After a brief moment of sun here in the very beginning, I completely lost that light. But when it did return, just in intermittent patches here and there, I went ahead and locked in my shadows. So if you're going to paint plein air, you haven't really done this before, I highly recommend locking in those shadows first and then moving on to those distant passages. And so as I bring the scene forward, it's relatively simple to keep control of those colors if we're using very simple mixes. So I'm using primarily titanium white mixed with a bit of Cremnitz white, burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and then balancing out my Cobalt teal and Quinacridone magenta. That teal and magenta mix is dynamite for painting plein air, and you can really broaden your range for some nice sea greens and blues, as well as some nice atmospheric violets using that magenta. Now, my best tip that I could share with you here is use a bigger brush than you feel comfortable with. When painting plein air, it's about getting that information down quickly, but I also want something that's going to inform my studio practice. After all, this is an exercise in working from observation, but it's also an exercise in effective mark making. It's the one thing that really helps me push this is by putting a bit of pressure on myself, using that bigger brush, forcing me to make concise statements. And so when I have a little brush, it causes me to fiddle, and that is an absolute time killer when painting out in the field. This 10 by 12 little panel took about an hour and a half to paint all up. So not too bad for the size of the panel. I'm fairly happy with the level of detail that's here, but I would have liked to have pushed it a little bit further with a bit more time, but it just wasn't on the cards for this particular day. Now, there is something that I'm challenging myself to do, and I'm working more and more on this. It's kind of a quest, an overall mission for my plein air paintings, and that is to capture moving water with transparency and reflection out in the field working in one layer. It's a little bit of a trick, but keeping my shadows nice and thin and some relatively sharp lines on those reflections of the dark rocks and some nice soft diffused blue reflections of the sky above, we're getting kind of close. Then the only trick is to get those nice sinuous curves of the white water spreading apart as it enters the foreground here. If you've watched my videos before, you've no doubt heard me say this, but this is so true for working plein air and in the studio. We only have so far that we can go with our tonal values. That range is limited between the darkest black that we can mix and pure titanium white. To create light, save that tonal best for last. These guys have already started their second painting. Can you believe it?
Oh, not me. That crashing?
Yeah, you gotta get started, man.
I can't believe they've already started their second painting. I've only just finished my first. It's mid-afternoon. I gotta get a wiggle on, but I'm looking for my second location. These rock pools look really nice. We're doing opposites today. I was looking that way, and they were looking this way, and now they're looking that way. Now I'm gonna look this way. I gotta be different. Oh, it's beautiful though out here. I mean, check out these subjects. Ooh, I'm really liking this rock pool. This is interesting. This is very interesting. This bit of water coming through here, the ripple action. That's so nice. I think that's a pretty good subject. It's got kind of everything I'm looking for in a plein air. Good foreground to trip on, nearly. Good foreground, good midground, excellent background. We've got red rocks in the distance, really beautiful. I'm gonna try and bust out an 8x10 in about an hour. So that's really gonna be pushing it before these guys have to go. So let's get into it. I have really fond memories of this coastline. Now, you might not know this, but I used to live in Wellington as a young boy. I was here between the ages of 6 and 10. I've got fond memories of exploring these rock pools as a kid, looking for all sorts of different critters that I could find. So time to try and capture that transparent, reflective water once again. Little did I know at the time, but my rock pool was soon to disappear with that outgoing tide. Now, I've completely lost my light, so I'm going to jump straight into those distant passages. Maybe it will appear here at some stage, and then I'll lock in some shadows. But I start with that really suggestive marks for the sky and those clouds above this formation here, which is called Red Rocks, out in the distance. Working out in the field with this kind of setup is so convenient. There's really no excuse not to have this in the back of your car so you can pull over every now and again and whip up a little painting. It really is a great way of working, and the lessons that we learn painting outside, this can always be applied to our studio work. I find that painting plein air has made me a much better studio painter. Now, I might not always produce the best paintings while working outside, but I certainly do learn a lot. If ever I didn't feel like finishing a painting, it's right now. Not gonna lie. My nose is running. It's getting cold. It's getting dark too. I've lost all my light. It's not coming out. And my rock pool is draining. So I'm not very happy, but Sam gave me some words of encouragement. He said, carry on, keep going, at least get the water in. You'll regret it otherwise. So that's what we'll do. We'll finish it off. But I don't want to. I'm very grateful for Sam's encouragement here, and I'm glad that I stuck with this little painting because it did end up turning around, and for an overcast day, it had some nice things about it. I certainly was enjoying the transparency in that water, And one thing I'm continuing to play with is the way that reflection falls off and we start to see some of those elements that are just below the surface. Again, I'm working with synthetics and bristles here to create some different edge quality, trying to capture the sharpness of some of the reflections of those rocks. It's the next day and we've got a beautiful sunny scene in front of us. I'm going to paint these rocks, play with that transparent reflective water once again. We've got some lovely blues and greens here in the foreground as well as those hills in the background. This is an area called Moa Point, just on the coast near the airport in Wellington. Now here in this video, I've got 4 demonstrations that I've shared with you, but the full version of this, all 4 demonstrations, clocks in at over an hour long, and you can check that out right now on Tisch Academy. What's Tisch Academy? Well, it's art school, but so much better. It's convenient, you can do it from anywhere, and there is loads of painting content up on Tisch Academy right now. In fact, there's well over 300 hours of video content. More painting content than you can shake a brush at. Not only do we paint plein air on Tisch Academy, but there's loads of landscape demonstrations, portraits, still life. If you're new to oils, there's a beginner's course called The Fundamentals of Oil Painting. There's also loads of critique videos, as well as the video version of the Creative Endeavor podcast. There's seriously so much going on at Tisch Academy, so check it out and you'll get a chance to see the full version of this, again, clocking in at over an hour long. So if you want to elevate your artistry today, then make sure you check it out. Click that link in the description down below, and when you do so, you can get yourself a 7-day free trial. So you got nothing to lose. Check it out, and we'll see you over there at the Academy. With so much glorious sunshine in this scene, I go ahead and block in those shadows, lock them in place, and then get to work on the water, which is beautiful and clear, and there's a lovely bottle green note coming through in some of these areas where the rocks are reflecting. Now, we can see what's happening in the water below because of the cancellation of the skylight that's reflecting in the water's surface. So it's not necessarily a rock reflection per se, it's just a cancellation of the sky reflection. As I'm looking at things in the landscape and thinking to myself, why does it look like that? These little visual discoveries that I'm making for myself, these are lessons that I'm carrying back into the studio. And ultimately, it helps me create better seascapes when I'm working in the studio. Now, this piece might not win me friends or favorable comments in that comment section, but I'm happy with it for an hour's work. And now for something completely different. Here we are on the Gladstone River, just north of Wellington. Time to find the composition. I think that's got it. I agree, like that river right there, cutting across the bottom, might be a bit of a problem. It's a nice spot though, I like it. So you're thinking looking that way,
Yeah.
getting in the trees, mountains in the background, foothills with light.
Yeah.
There's some nice rhythm going in, but yeah, it could work. All right, we've got a location, we've got a subject. Time to get out the gear, get on with it. I'm working on an 8x10 panel once again. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I rubbed these down with an imprimatura, a mix of burnt umber and burnt sienna, and I let this dry thoroughly before attempting my painting. I'm going to paint this rocky outcrop that's just on the water here, reflecting. I've got some really beautiful afternoon sunlight that's cutting across it. So once I sketch up my composition, I go ahead and lock in those shadows. This is a scenario where the light is going to change incredibly quickly. And in fact, very shortly, we're going to lose it over the hill that's behind us. Now the shadows I keep pretty thin, working with a synthetic filbert brush here, and it's a combination of Quinacridone magenta, ultramarine blue, a bit of permanent crimson, and occasionally a bit of burnt umber as well. It's pretty dark here in the immediate foreground. I make sure that my darker tonal values in the distance are slightly lighter than those darks in the immediate foreground. This will help me achieve some sense of depth. One thing that's helped me speed up my painting and create some more painterly brushstrokes when working plein air is using some Tisch daggers. I'm not just saying that because they're named after me. They are actually my favorite brush to use. It's a bristled dagger brush, very versatile with the types of marks you can achieve, and you can find these by visiting rosemarineco.com or clicking the link in the description down below. Check out some of these brushes. Your art will definitely thank you for it. And again, it's one of my favorite brushes to use. And I'm not just saying that. It does really help me with a freer, looser technique out in the field, particularly when I use one slightly bigger than I'm comfortable with out in the field, forcing me to make some of those more expressive marks. Now I've locked in all my shadows and I'm good to go. I'm using another panel here to just shield my painting from the sun and my palette as well, so they're both in the shade. Sometimes it's a bit of a challenge working out in the sunshine, you see, because it's difficult to gauge those tones and colors. As I bring the painting forward, I make sure that my greens are slightly more saturated, so there's a lot more of a brilliant chroma coming through, a lot more yellow. And so I'm not mixing as many things with my greens to knock down that saturation or the intensity of the color. One thing I notice when I'm working out in the field is the greens right in the foreground are incredibly punchy, but they fall off and fade away as the landscape goes back into the distance. Now with my mark making down here in the water, I try to keep to a stroke that is more or less vertical or horizontal to mimic the way water ripples and reflects. Whatever's happening above that water's surface is reflected down below in a mirror-like fashion, but it's got a slight broken quality to it. And where the sun is shining through the body of water, I notice that it's got this beautiful warmth coming through. Transparent red oxide really helps for this. It communicates those tannins that are suspended within the water itself. A few little brilliant pops of yellow and green here in the foliage illuminated by the sun, and the study is more or less good to go. I decided I'd take this one back into the studio to finish off at a later date. Sometimes it's difficult to get everything you want to get in out in the field, particularly when you lose your light. So whenever I'm out here, I shoot plenty of photographic reference too. Oh, and if you want copyright and royalty-free images, you gotta check out Tisch Academy. Well, thanks for spending this time with me painting outside. I've enjoyed your company, and I'll see you again in the next video.